At 78, I learned my children were deciding where I would live after I left the hospital. They hadn't asked me. They were standing just outside my curtain, discussing assisted living facilities with a nurse. My son was worried about stairs. My daughter was worried about who could check on me. Everyone sounded reasonable. That was what frightened me. Because while they were planning the safest version of my future, nobody seemed to notice that I was still lying 10 feet away, listening. And the worst part? When they finally asked what I thought, I almost told them to do whatever was easiest. My name is Joan Miller. I'm 78 years old. I spent 36 years working as an accountant. Numbers always made sense to me. There was comfort in them. A column either balanced or it didn't. An expense either fit the budget or it didn't. Problems could be examined. Options could be compared. Decisions could be made. I had always been good at decisions. At least, that was what I believed. Then I fell in my kitchen. It happened on an ordinary Thursday morning. I was carrying a cup of coffee toward the table when my slipper caught against the edge of a small rug. I went down hard. There was no dramatic moment. No warning. 1 second I was standing. The next, I was on the floor, staring at the bottom of my kitchen cabinets. I tried to move. Pain shot through my hip. I knew immediately that something was wrong. My phone was on the counter. I could see it. I could not reach it. For almost 20 minutes, I lay there before remembering the emergency button my daughter Amy had insisted I wear. I had complained when she bought it. I called it my old lady necklace. That morning, I pressed it. The ambulance came. The X-rays confirmed a fracture. By Friday afternoon, I had undergone surgery. My doctor said everything had gone well. Those were comforting words. Then came the less comforting ones. Recovery, physical therapy, mobility, fall risk, discharge planning. Suddenly, everyone seemed interested in my house. How many floors? Where was the bedroom? How many stairs? Did I live alone? Yes, I lived alone. I had lived alone for 11 years since my husband Richard died. I liked my house. It was not large, but it was mine. My kitchen, my books, my little garden, my chair by the living room window. I knew which floorboard creaked outside the bathroom. I knew how afternoon light moved across the dining room wall. I knew where everything belonged. So when I heard my son Stephen say the words assisted living, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He was speaking quietly outside my hospital curtain, not quietly enough. There are a couple of good places near us, he told the nurse. Then Amy spoke. I found one near my house, too. The nurse asked something I couldn't hear. Stephen answered, She's been alone too long anyway. I stared at the ceiling. Too long? Until that moment, I had not known there was a time limit on living in my own home. I cleared my throat loudly. The conversation stopped. A few seconds later, Amy stepped around the curtain. She smiled too brightly. You awake? I am now. Stephen followed her. He was 52. Amy was 48. They were good children. I need to say that. Neither of them wanted my house. Neither wanted my money. Neither was waiting to get rid of me. They loved me. That is what made what happened next so complicated. Amy placed a hand on my blanket. We were just talking about what happens after you leave here. I heard. Her smile disappeared. Stephen pulled a chair closer. Mom, nobody's deciding anything. You were discussing facilities. Options. Facilities. Options, he repeated. I looked at Amy. She opened her bag. Then she pulled out 3 brochures. 3. She had already found 3. The first showed a smiling, gray-haired couple walking beside a pond. The second showed a dining room with white tablecloths. The third had a photograph of a woman doing yoga. I had never done yoga in my life. Amy placed them beside me. These are just possibilities. How long have you had those? She hesitated. I started looking yesterday. Yesterday? I had been out of surgery less than 24 hours. They have transportation, she said. Activities. Stephen added, and no stairs. I have not agreed to leave my house. Nobody said you did. You're shopping. We're preparing. There was that reasonable tone again. Preparing. Safety. Options. All good words. All words that somehow made me feel like the only unreasonable person in the room. I pushed the brochures away. I am going home. Stephen looked at Amy. It lasted less than a second. I still saw it. What? I asked. Nothing. What was that look? Mom, you haven't even started physical therapy. I will. The stairs may be a problem. Then I'll work on the stairs. Amy sat beside me. We're not saying never. Never what? Never go home. I stared at her. That was the first time I realized something had shifted. My house had gone from being the obvious destination to something I might have to earn my way back into. Physical therapy began the next morning. I had imagined walking. Instead, the therapist first taught me how to stand. Standing. Something I had done without thinking for 78 years. Now it required instructions. Hands here. Lean forward. Push. Don't twist. Breathe. The first attempt was humiliating. My legs shook. Pain ran through my hip. I sat back down. The therapist smiled. That's okay. We'll try again. I wanted to tell her I had raised 2 children, managed payroll for a company with more than 200 employees, cared for my husband through heart surgery. I did not need congratulations for standing beside a hospital bed, but the next attempt was worse. That frightened me. For the first time, I wondered whether Stephen might be right about the stairs. My house had 14 of them. Bedroom upstairs, full bathroom upstairs, laundry in the basement. I had always considered stairs part of the house. Now everyone treated them like evidence. That afternoon, Stephen asked how therapy went. Fine. Amy asked whether I had walked. A little. How far? I didn't measure it. They exchanged another look. I hated those looks. A few days later, a discharge planner came into my room. Stephen and Amy were both there. She asked about my home. Stephen answered first. 2 stories. She asked about support nearby. Amy answered. I'm about 25 minutes away, Stephen said. 40 for me. The planner looked at me. Mrs. Miller, do you have a preference for where you'd like to recover? I should have answered immediately. Home. Instead, I looked at my children. Stephen had taken 3 days off work already. Amy had been coming before and after her shifts. Both looked exhausted. So I said something I had started saying more often since entering the hospital. Whatever is easiest. Amy looked relieved. That relief hurt more than I expected. The discharge planner began explaining rehabilitation facilities. Temporary, she said. A few weeks. Maybe longer. That sounded reasonable. I agreed. Then Stephen asked about what might happen afterward. The planner said it would depend on my progress. Amy mentioned assisted living again. I said nothing. That evening, I wondered why. Why had I gone from insisting I was going home to sitting silently while other people discussed where I might live? The answer was uncomfortable. I didn't want to be a burden. That phrase had been living inside me for years. After Richard died, I promised myself I would not become one of those mothers whose children had to organize their lives around her. I learned online banking. I hired people for repairs. I drove myself to appointments. When Amy offered help, I often refused. When Stephen called, I told him everything was fine. I was proud of that. But lying in the hospital changed the arithmetic. Now they were missing work. Driving back and forth. Talking to nurses, bringing clothes, charging my phone, handling insurance paperwork. Every time I considered saying what I wanted, another thought arrived first. How much trouble will that cause them? So when Amy brought more information about a facility near her house, I listened. When Stephen discussed selling my car eventually, I didn't object. When they talked about clearing out the house if I moved, I stared at the television. I told myself I was being practical. Really, I was disappearing from my own decisions. 3 days later, we had what Stephen called a family meeting. I hated the phrase immediately. It was my hospital room, but somehow I felt like the guest. Stephen opened a notebook. Amy had her phone. They had made a list. Cost, distance, medical support, transportation, meals, visiting hours. They compared 2 assisted living communities. One was closer to Stephen. One was closer to Amy. Stephen preferred the first because it was less expensive. Amy preferred the second because she could visit after work. They discussed traffic, parking, whether my furniture would fit. I listened. Eventually, Amy turned to me. "What do you think?" There were at least 10 things I could have said. I don't want either one. I want to go home. I need more time. I don't know yet. Instead, I heard myself say, "Whichever is easier for you two." Stephen nodded. Amy looked down at her phone, and the meeting continued. That night, I could not sleep. A nurse came in around 2. She adjusted something on my IV and asked whether I needed anything. I almost said no. Then I stopped. "I'd like some water." She smiled. "Of course." Such a small thing. But I remember thinking how strange it was that asking for water suddenly felt more honest than the conversations I had been having about the rest of my life. The next morning, a hospital social worker came to see me. Her name was Denise Harper. She was 59. She had short brown hair and a habit of waiting after she asked a question. Most people do not really wait. They ask, then start preparing their next sentence. Denise waited. We talked about rehabilitation, my house, my children. Then she asked, "What would you prefer?" I gave my usual answer. "I don't want to make things difficult for my children." She nodded. "That wasn't my question." I looked at her. "What would you prefer?" "I suppose whatever is safest." She waited. Again, I started becoming irritated. "Isn't that what everyone wants?" "Probably." She folded her hands. "But if there were several reasonably safe options, which one would you want?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That frightened me. Not because I had no preference, because I had spent so much time calculating everybody else's needs that I could no longer hear my own clearly. Denise did not rescue me. She simply said, "You don't have to answer today." After she left, I stared at the brochures on my table. For the first time, I read them for myself, not as places my children might prefer. As places I might have to wake up every morning, I imagined my bed there, my coffee, my books, a stranger walking past my door, meals at scheduled times. Maybe I would like it. Maybe I wouldn't. I realized I knew almost nothing. Yet I was close to letting someone choose. That afternoon, I asked for Denise again. I had questions. Could I go to rehabilitation first? Yes. Could I reassess afterward? Yes. Could I receive help at home? Possibly. Could the house be modified? Depending on my recovery. Could I rent a downstairs hospital bed temporarily? Yes. Could someone evaluate the house before I decided? Yes. Nobody had hidden these options from me. That mattered. I had simply not asked. For the next week, I asked questions. Lots of them. I asked the physical therapist what I would realistically need to do before going home. I asked about shower rails, temporary home care, meal delivery, transportation, stair modifications. I wrote everything down. For the first time since my fall, I felt like an accountant again. Not because numbers would solve everything, because I was participating. Amy noticed. "You've been busy." "I have." "Why didn't you tell us you were looking into home care?" "Because I'm looking into it." She looked surprised. I understood why. For weeks, I had made my children part of every decision before I had even formed an opinion. Then Amy said something important. I thought you wanted assisted living. Why? Because you never said you didn't. I looked at her. She looked genuinely confused. Not manipulative, not defensive. Confused. And suddenly I saw the other side of the pattern. My children had been filling a silence I created. They were still moving too fast. But I had given them almost nothing to slow down for. I don't know what I want yet, I said. Amy nodded. Okay, that was it. No argument. I wished the next part had been that easy. 2 days before my discharge to rehabilitation, Stephen arrived with paperwork. He placed a folder on the tray beside my bed. What's that? Just some forms. For what? The assisted living place near Amy. My stomach tightened. Why? They need information if we want to keep the opening. We? He paused. You know what I mean. No, I don't. Mom, it's not a commitment. I opened the folder. My name was printed across the top. My birth date, insurance information, current medications. And under a section labeled Anticipated Residence, the facility's name was already there. Seeing it written down changed something. Until then, everything had been conversation. Brochures, suggestions, possibilities. Now my future had an address. An address I had never chosen. Who filled this out? Amy started it. I finished some of it. Why? We don't want you to lose the room. I never asked for the room. Stephen exhaled. We're trying to stay ahead of this. Stay ahead of what? A crisis. I looked at him. Am I the crisis? His face changed. That's not what I meant. But that's what this feels like. Mom, no. My voice shook. I hated that. I wanted it steady. I have spent my whole life trying not to make things difficult for you. Stephen sat down. I know. No, I don't think you do. I touched the folder. I keep saying whatever is easiest because I don't want you and Amy rearranging your lives around me. We don't mind helping, but I've been making decisions based on whether you mind. He was quiet. And now there is an address on a form for where I am supposed to live. It's only an option. Then why does it feel like a decision? Neither of us spoke. That was my lowest point. Not because my children had betrayed me. They hadn't. Not because assisted living was terrible. It wasn't. It was because I saw how close I had come to letting fear make a permanent decision. Their fear that I would fall again. My fear of becoming a burden. Everybody was afraid, and fear had started doing the deciding. When Amy arrived that evening, the three of us talked. Really talked. There were tears, mostly mine. A little anger, mostly Stephen's. Amy kept asking practical questions. That was her way of coping. Eventually, I told them what I wanted. I am going to rehabilitation. They nodded. I'll stay as long as the therapists think I need to. Another nod. Then I want an evaluation of my house. Stephen opened his mouth. I continued. If I can return safely with help, I want to try. Amy asked. And if you can't, then I choose somewhere else. I emphasize the word I. Stephen looked at me. What if we disagree? Then you tell me why. And I listen. He waited, but I decide. That was the first time since my fall that I felt like myself. I went to rehabilitation for 90 days, longer than I wanted, shorter than Stephen feared. I learned to walk confidently again, then with a cane. Then, without one for short distances, I learned something else too. My old house was not going to become young because I wanted to stay there. The stairs were still stairs. The laundry was still in the basement. The bathroom doors were narrow. The yard still needed care. When I finally returned home with temporary support, I was happy. For a while. Then something surprised me. I started noticing the house differently. Not because Stephen or Amy told me to. Because I was ready to. I noticed how often I avoided the upstairs, how much energy ordinary maintenance took, how nervous I felt carrying laundry. 6 months after my fall, I visited a retirement community. Not one from Amy's original brochures. One I found myself. It had apartments, no stairs, a small balcony, a library downstairs, transportation if I wanted it. I visited twice. The second time, I sat alone on the balcony of an empty apartment. I could imagine my chair there, my books, my coffee. That mattered. I signed the lease 3 weeks later. Stephen was shocked. I thought you wanted to stay home. I did. What changed? I did. That answer felt good. I sold the house the following spring. I cried on the last day. Of course I did. Richard and I had lived there for 39 years. Leaving hurt, but there was something very different about that pain. Nobody had removed me. Nobody had decided I was finished. I had looked honestly at my life and chosen what came next. I still need help, more than I did before my fall. Amy sometimes drives me to appointments. Stephen handles repairs I don't understand. I use the community shuttle. I have a cleaning woman twice a month. None of that makes me feel powerless now, because I finally understand something I wish I had understood in that hospital room. Needing help and losing authority are not the same thing. The danger comes when everyone starts treating them as though they are. Sometimes families do this out of love. Sometimes older parents help it happen because we are terrified of becoming inconvenient. We say, whatever is easiest, whatever you think. I don't want to be a burden. And if we say those things often enough, people may eventually believe that our preference really does not matter. Mine mattered. Even when it wasn't practical. Even when it changed. Even when my children disagreed. I am 78. My body has limits it did not have 10 years ago. Pretending otherwise would not make me independent, but neither would allowing other people to build my future around their convenience. Real independence at this age looks different than it once did. Sometimes it means accepting a cane. Sometimes it means accepting a ride. Sometimes it means admitting that the house you love no longer fits the life you have, but the decision still needs your voice. That is what I almost lost. Not my house, my place in the conversation. If you're listening to this because your family has started discussing what is safest for you, I hope they listen to what you want too. And if you're the adult child trying to protect someone you love, I hope you remember to ask before the plan becomes a decision. Sometimes one question can change everything. What would you prefer? I couldn't answer it the first time. Now I can. If this story reminded you of something happening in your own family, I'd be glad to hear your experience in the comments. And if you'd like more realistic stories about aging, family, independence, and the quiet changes that happen when parents and adult children begin changing roles, please consider liking the video and subscribing. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.